Some of us chase ghost towns the way others chase mountain peaks. We're not looking for danger. Not exactly. We're just drawn to the silence of places left behind. The kind that aren't on maps anymore. The kind no one wants to talk about. That's what I was after when I found the cabin. It was late October, northern Oregon, somewhere in the wilderness between trail markers and forgotten roads. I'd taken a detour from a logging access path I'd found on a surveyor's map, barely a depression in the earth, overgrown with moss and frostbitten pine needles. It felt promising. These old spurs, especially when they dead end abruptly, tend to lead to something. A collapsed mill, a hunting post, sometimes just a rusted gate with a story baked into the hinges. That day, I was lucky. The trees parted into a narrow clearing I hadn't seen. It was round, unnaturally so, like the trees had been pushed back, and in the middle, slumped and sagging, was a cabin. The roof was warped inward in one corner, the porch tilted like a jaw unhinged. The wood was black in places, not burned, just darkened with time and moisture, like it had absorbed something deep into the grain. A single shutter hung by a nail. The windows were boarded over from the inside. No recent boot prints, no path leading to or from. This is what I'd come for. I stood at the tree line a moment longer than I normally do, gear resting against my hip. Something about it sat heavy in my chest. Not fear, not just yet. Just that low hum of pressure, like the air gets right before a storm breaks. But I stepped onto that porch. The boards creaked, expectedly. A nail had rusted out of a support beam and lay curled on the wood like an insect. The door opened easily. No lock, no resistance. Inside, the air was still, not stale, just quiet. It smelled of wet rot and old bark, the kind of scent that clings to abandoned things. The light was low, but enough slipped through the cracks in the boarded windows to make out the shape of the room. It was intact, sparse, but lived in at one point. A small table in the center, a rocking chair faced the hearth, as if someone had just stood up. An iron stove sat in the corner, blackened with soot. And in the far right, nearly hidden beneath a pile of collapsed debris, was a cot. Everything looked undisturbed, forgotten, but not destroyed. I moved through the space carefully, boots as quiet as could be, eyes scanning for anything personal. Old cabins like this sometimes have remnants, letters, an old coffee tin, a dented lamp. But this place, it had been stripped of identity. Except for one thing. In the back right corner, beneath the fallen debris, something dark had bled through the floor. I wouldn't have seen it if I hadn't shifted a broken panel to check the wall's structure. It wasn't obvious. The stain was rust-colored, old. It had spread wide and thin, like someone had tried to wipe it up once, maybe scrub it, but it soaked in too deep. The dust layered over it in streaks, as if boards had been dragged across it later to cover it up. It looked like blood, and it had been there a long time. I crouched over it, exhaling through my nose. That weight in my chest deepened. Not fear, still, but unmistakable unease. Something in my gut was telling me something bad had happened here. That much was clear, but there was no sign of violence otherwise, at least that stood out. No other evidence that would make itself known, just this dark reminder in the corner, nearly hidden, as though the place itself wanted it forgotten. I stood, repositioned the debris, not because I wanted to hide it, but because I didn't want to see it anymore. Then I noticed something strange. The chair, the one near the stove, had shifted. It was so subtle, maybe an inch or two, but enough to notice, at least from what I recalled. I told myself I bumped it, brushed it without realizing, but I strongly feel I would have remembered that. I would have felt that. I stepped back into the center of the room, took stock again, and something else was off. It was the lighting, the gaps in the boarded windows. They almost seemed smaller now, not just from the light outside, almost like the boards had shifted closer, even if just a little. At this point, I figured I was just spooking myself. I was alone. I was certain I was alone. But the air felt different, denser, like the room was holding its breath. And then faintly, behind me, the sound, a soft drag across wood. Not loud, not dramatic, just enough to confirm what I already knew. Was I alone? I didn't speak. I didn't panic. I turned slowly and prepping myself for anything. The cot sheet, worn and shredded, had been twisted, almost like it was pulled slightly toward the corner, like someone had crawled off of it. My brain, sharp and trained to rationalize, began stacking options. Settling, rats, another animal, maybe even a shift of wind through the cracks. But the boards had moved, the chair had shifted, the sheet looked like it was pulled. This didn't feel like settling. It felt like staging, like someone was watching me, somehow, in this small space, moving things when I wasn't looking. I took one final glance around the room. My eyes caught the scratches on the inside of the front door. 3 long, thin lines, downward, shallow, almost like fingernails. They weren't fresh, but whatever caused this definitely was deliberate. And at that point now, I was done. I backed toward the door slowly, not because I thought something would leap out, but because I didn't trust the cabin to stay the same if I turned back. I stepped onto the porch finally, turned and walked into the woods without looking back. By the time I reached my car, night had barely fallen. I drove in silence. I didn't put music on, didn't call anyone. Even if I wanted to, the service out there wouldn't allow it. I didn't talk about what I found. There was no story to tell, at least not one that sat right with me. But here's the part that still gets under my skin. When I got home, I did what I always do after a long hike. Dumped the photos from my camera onto the laptop, sorted them into folders, and started tagging locations. I had taken a lot out there. Wide shots of the clearing, detail shots of the cabin's exterior, the warped porch, the blackened siding, a few close-ups of the rusted trinkets I'd found on a windowsill and tucked away corners of the structure. Even the way the tree line framed the building in that strange circular shape. I was documenting it all. Most of the photos were exactly what I expected. Quiet, lonely, the kind of decay that feels peaceful in its own way. But one image didn't feel like the others. It was a shot I took right after stepping inside. But I noticed the window on the left, just behind the slats. There was a faint, dark disruption in the light. Not a shape so much as a hint of one. It could have been a trick of the light and the angle it was taken. Maybe a discoloration on the glass. But once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. It almost looked like someone was standing right outside the window, not peering or looking in, just randomly there. I never noticed it in the moment, never felt eyes on me, but it was only in that one photo, the last one I took before I left. I think about that trip often, and the fact that I'll never truly know What happened?